Hello everyone, and welcome to Dice Dev. In the first episode, I don't think I was clear enough that the games made in Dice Dev would be available as a free download. Because, well, nobody downloaded it. I'll put the reminder before the gameplay footage next time. Anyway, the rolls. First up is the D8 roll for format. 3. Strategy. Next, the D12 roll for genre. 7. Puzzle. Now on to the D6 roll for presentation. 1. 3D models. Oh boy. Moving on, the D10 roll for setting. 9. Modern. Now, 2D20 for theme. 16 and 17. Create and destroy. Pretty balanced. Finally, the D20 restriction roll. 4. No text, if you insist. Let's get started on the plan, which I'm going to call Toppleville. This will take place in a kid's playroom and will consist of 2 parts. The first is building a city out of blocks, cardboard boxes, and stacks of paper cups, the latter 2 of which are pre-placed. After that, a giant robot, well, a toy robot, you know what I mean, will begin a programmed path through the city, destroying any buildings it comes across, except cardboard boxes. The robot's path can be altered to turn left when hitting stacks of plastic blocks, and right when hitting stacks of wood blocks. The goal is to knock down all the paper cup stacks. No text can be used anywhere in the game, so everything such as the puzzle number and the controls will have to be explained symbolically to the player. Alright, let's get started. Going to start with Blender this time, which I have little experience with. 3D is not really my forte, but the shapes I need are pretty simple, and Blender seems to be pretty easy to... okay. This time with X-ray view on, Blender seems to be pretty easy to use for this kind of thing, so I'm feeling a little bit better about the 3D model roll. There we go, much better. Honestly, it was kind of fun carving out the shapes I needed for the toy blocks, as well as finally getting all this experience with Blender. Now to push those sides in just a little bit and... Now to push in those sides individually a little bit. Okay, that works. Not bad. I'm pretty pleased with the results. Now I bring it into the game, add a free plastic texture, and I've got a plastic block. Taking a break from modeling, I started working on other things, such as the code to set up the rug that the city would be built on. Some other vital initialization functions, such as setting up the city array that stores the current state of each tile of the city, and a placeholder for the robot movement, like a scaffold, to keep the structure together and to build upon later. Back to Blender, I modeled the paper cup, starting to feel more comfortable doing this. A quick import, adding the paper texture and the color that I wanted, and building the stack, setting up the prefab to spawn the stacks later. I did the same for the plastic blocks, but didn't want the colors to be uniform, so I wrote a function to randomize each block's color whenever a new stack spawns to give it some variety. I also added the physics for when a stack gets knocked over. It basically keeps them grouped without physics, and then ungroups and applies the force to each object individually. Of course, that's just the initial knockdown. The robot moving across the playfield will need to push blocks around as well. So, I set up a zone on the robot object to do just that. After some testing and tweaking, I got it to behave the way I wanted it to. Since the cardboard boxes won't move, I just built them out of primitives instead of 3D modeling them. Rather than set up a texture for each side, since you can't on a primitive anyway, I opted to just make decals. I don't know if this was the easiest way to do it or if I was making it needlessly complex, but hey, it worked and we're moving on. Now, the robot itself had to actually move in different directions and turn, so that's what I started working on next. The movements were a bit artificial, but I mean, that's kind of the point. It's a robot. Now I could start filling in that placeholder function from earlier. Helped me from getting confused about what goes where. I also needed to get all the stacks ready so that I could spawn them in later. Aside from the robot, which I could just reposition, everything else had to be ready to spawn in when needed. Speaking of stacks, it was back to Blender to make the wood blocks, then building the actual stack just like before. The wood blocks are going to use the same color randomizer that the plastic blocks used. Script reuse is nice when you can do it. And with that, all of the buildings were done, and just the robot remained. I'm going off on a little tangent while making the robot here. See, after the first episode, a friend of mine told me I shouldn't be so quick to write off Unreal Engine like I did, which I get. My main problem with it wasn't its complexity, but rather I just didn't do a lot of 3D work, and that's what it was geared towards. But now that I'm actually getting my feet wet in Blender, I'm starting to feel more confident about 3D than I previously was. So maybe I did write it off too quickly. I'm actually enjoying modeling all of this, which you can see here as I complete making the robot. So you know what? I've decided in a future episode, perhaps even the next one, I'm going to give Unreal Engine a try. Let me know what you think. Moving on, the robot was now in place and could start moving around the level. I made some simple animations, such as this idle animation, and this one for when it's striking a building. I made a simple visual effect for selecting a rug tile, and the code for actually selecting it. I implemented camera movement next, since you needed to be able to see all the tiles you were selecting after all. I made sure to keep the camera within the bounds of whatever size rug was spawned. I set up more, I'm just going to start calling it scaffolding, for the building selection and placement. And then all the triggers for getting the robot in motion to start pathing its way through the level, triggered by the player once ready. This includes all the actions taken, such as knocking down buildings and which direction to turn based on which building was knocked down, and turning around when hitting a cardboard box. Here, I started on the GUI, which needed to explain all the controls symbolically to the player without any text involved. It shouldn't be too hard, since the player only needs to place buildings that turn the robot left or right, and those can be relayed by simple arrows. Obviously, I couldn't write the name Toppleville on the main screen, so instead there's just a logo. This camera instruction could be interpreted as either WASD or the arrow keys, so both work to move the camera. I set up the basic building GUI and included a counter on each side, showing how many of each building type you had left to place. I even put the copyright 2024 notice on the title screen symbolically. Once everything was in place, I linked them up to the main script and got them set up to activate and deactivate when needed. Pretty basic stuff by this point overall. There isn't really a whole lot to say about it. All the basics were in place. Building placement, letting the robot loose to destroy everything, and the cup stack count at the top of the screen showing what was left. I also finally set up the scaffolding to change the game status. I always have something like this to make sure everything's happening only when it should. To make the level selection easier, the game needs to read level data from simple text files and use the data it read to build the level. This proved fairly simple to read in strings from the text files and break them down character by character into all the level components required. That way, I could make a level simply by placing numbers in the text file. Almost everything was in place now, level loading and construction and the gameplay. Simple game overall, really. I also realized here that the cup counter wasn't that intuitive and made cup icons for it instead to make it clear what the goal was. Now on to the music, and this time I actually remembered to record the audio. Fascinating. I don't know. Should I keep these sections in? I've been wondering about that since last episode. I guess it's interesting, but there isn't a lot for me to say here, and I'd be talking over the sound anyway. Still, I can see how some people might want to know more about this part of the process, so I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think I should keep including it. Finally, the sound effects and music can be implemented, and the game is complete. This was an interesting one. Very easy gameplay, truth be told. But I still had fun making it, and I learned a lot about Blender in the process. As I mentioned at the start, you can follow a link in the description to download the game and try it for yourself. The following gameplay will only show the first few levels, so that you can try the last levels yourself. They're not hard at all to solve, but I hope you enjoy them anyway. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Links to the game download and my Discord are in the description below. If you like this, feel free to leave comments or suggestions and subscribe for future episodes. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.